Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed.
So let's dive into the current global picture. It's complex, to say the least. We're looking at major powers, U.S. policy, Russia, Ukraine, Europe, the Middle East. Quite a lot on the table.
Absolutely. And we're trying to understand how different countries are handling these, well, really profound challenges, looking at their motives, their strategies, and, where things might be headed based on their actions.
Okay, let's start with the U.S. There's this very strong anti-Russian feeling, right? Criticizing Russian President Putin seems almost required politically. We saw Senator Graham and Senator Blumenthal talking about huge tariffs, 500% on places like India, Russia, Brazil. Graham even met with Ukrainian officials about it.
Right, but then you look at U.S. President Trump's reaction. He essentially said, okay, Congress can pass that law, sure.
Yeah.
But he keeps full control. When the tariffs hit, how they get lifted is all up to him.
So Congress's role is minimized.
Pretty much. It makes Senator Graham's move look more like maybe a political statement, a talking point, rather than actual binding policy right now. And U.S. President Trump also mentioned this 50-day waiting period, supposedly to give Russia time to think again.
Interesting timing. And there were also those reports, weren't there, about the Trump administration maybe wanting to see Zelensky gone, even while Zelensky was talking to Graham about the very same sanctions.
Exactly. It's quite a twist. And get this, after the U.S. and Europe announced these sanctions, the Russian stock market, it actually went up.
Up. By how much?
2.7%. It suggests Russia isn't exactly, shaking in his boots over these sanctions.
Doesn't sound like it. And how are other countries reacting? China? Brazil?
Well, China's response was firm. They said they won't give in and they'll use everything they have to hit back. Brazil basically said, fine, if the U.S. doesn't want to do business, we won't either. Tit for tat.
And India. You mentioned India.
India is seen as being in a tough spot. They have to be careful. Getting into a supply chain fight with China could wreck their economy. Especially because, right now, it doesn't look like the U.S. is ready to step in and cushion the blow if India follows U.S. demands and suffers for it.
So piecing this together, it looks like U.S. President Trump might be using these tariff threats as a kind of shield, maybe to cover up the lack of a clear Russia strategy, buy some time, try to shape things behind the scenes.
It seems plausible. And the goal could well be, like those reports suggested, easing Zelensky out, finding someone else who would make the kind of concessions needed to get Russia to the negotiating table.
And Russia's approach in all this, are they working to any deadlines?
Not really. Russia isn't bound by a 50-day clock or any other calendar, it seems. Their strategic goal is simple: victory. And achieving that involves daily pressure, inflicting casualties, pushing Ukrainian forces back, minimizing their own losses.
It was a sustained campaign.
Absolutely. A comprehensive one. We're seeing constant strikes on infrastructure, military sites, hundreds of drones, daily 400, 600 sometimes, followed by precision weapons. And the thinking is they'll keep this up until Ukraine either stops existing as a state or agrees to surrender on Russia's terms. It's a war of attrition, really.
And what about Ukraine's leadership? The British, the Americans, NATO, they still act like they get the final say, right?
They certainly project that image. But Russia's been very clear. Their view is that Western opinions don't matter on this. Russia, and Russia alone, will choose who leads Ukraine next.
Even if there are elections.
Well, Russia might be open to an interim leader chosen through elections, yeah. But the main purpose of those elections, from their perspective, would be to legitimize removing Zelensky and to install someone who can, constitutionally, sign off on the surrender terms Russia wants.
Let's shift over to Europe then. Germany, for instance, we're hearing about deindustrialization, an energy crisis, deep political divides, even talk of potentially banning the AfD, the second biggest party. That sounds pretty unstable.
It does. German Chancellor Merz's government is seen as quite fragile, vulnerable to collapse if challenged effectively. And his stance on Ukraine, some see it as a way to align himself with the EU and US flags, to frame it as a just cause needing sacrifice.
A way to maybe distract from domestic problems?
Exactly. It potentially provides an excuse, or at least a narrative, for the government's policy failures back home.
And what does this kind of fragility in a major player like Germany mean for NATO? We've heard NATO described as a money pit with legacy structures. Some even say maybe it's better off dissolved.
Well, if the U.S. were to step back significantly, Yeah, NATO would likely splinter. You'd probably see at least 2, maybe 3 factions emerge. The big Western powers, UK, France, Germany.
Okay.
Then maybe other Western-aligned countries, perhaps Italy leading them. And then the Eastern Bloc nations, plus Finland and Sweden, who see themselves right on the front line.
And they wouldn't stick together.
Unlikely. The Western powers probably wouldn't want the Eastern states dictating how everyone deals with Russia. You'd lose discipline. It could descend into, well, a bunch of bickering children, as one analysis put it. The whole thing could just dissolve.
That really highlights Europe's reliance on the U.S. Since World War II, the Marshall Plan, Europe seems economically, politically tied to the U.S.
Yes, one way to put it is Europe being like the adult child living in the U.S. parental basement, never quite making fully independent decisions. The G7, for example, is heavily U.S. influenced, acting as a control mechanism. And security-wise, the reliance on NATO, which the U.S. dominates, just reinforces that.
Is there an example of this, a lack of independence?
Well, think about German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Remember when U.S. President Biden reportedly threatened to take out the Nord Stream pipeline? Scholz's silence then was seen by many as proof Germany couldn't really act without a U.S. green light.
And there's a deeper history with Germany too, right? Going back to just after World War II.
Absolutely. The idea of a Fourth Reich actually started way back then, when the U.S. started kind of whitewashing German war crimes. Why? To get German military forces ready to potentially use against the Soviets.
And this continued.
Yes. The Bundeswehr, the modern German army, was set up led by former Nazi generals. The BND, German intelligence, it basically absorbed General Galen's Eastern Intelligence Organization. That was an outfit originally created to spy on the Soviets, worked with Ukrainian banderists, and the CIA ran it for about a decade.
So Germany was conditioned in a way?
Conditioned both to follow the U.S. lead and also to, well, downplay or obscure its Nazi past. So now you see German leaders adopting stances they think Washington wants, and some argue they're repeating reprehensible behaviors from the past.
Like what?
Well, you hear current German leaders saying they won't make the same mistake as in World War II. Yet some observers see them as engaging in what they call a war of aggression against Russia. It's a very pointed historical comparison.
Okay, let's look at Poland. They advise their citizens to leave Russia. Why would they do that?
It could be they're seeing signs of potential breakdown or conflict spilling over within Ukraine itself. A precautionary measure, maybe. But in terms of Poland intervening, the assessment is their military just isn't capable. It supposedly ran out of ammo in 2 weeks. No real offensive punch.
So they couldn't go into Western Ukraine?
If they tried, they'd likely face immediate pushback from forces in Belarus. And if Polish forces crossed into Belarus, the prediction was Warsaw could fall. So intervention seems highly unlikely.
What about the UK? They seem involved, particularly with figures like Zelensky. What's their actual influence?
The UK definitely projects influence, tries to shape perceptions about Ukraine's future. But again, from Russia's viewpoint, it doesn't really count for much. That drone attack on Russian bombers, described as a British trick play, militarily minor, it just made Russia ramp up its own air attacks and drone building.
So style over substance, perhaps?
That's the view, yes. Relying on trick plays instead of solid military capability. And Zelensky himself, he's painted as a corrupt general, no real power base at home, unlikely to win any fair election, and Russia certainly wouldn't accept him. They link him to figures like Stepan Bandera, which is a non-starter for Moscow.
Let's switch to the Middle East, Iran. The foreign minister did an interview on Fox News. What's the strategy there?
It looks a bit like Russian President Putin's playbook, actually.
Yeah.
Talk about being open to talks, willing to engage, while continuing their actions on the ground. Internally, Iran seems to have tightened up decision-making through their Supreme National Security Council, presenting a united, firm front, no mixed signals, and they keep those strong ties with Russia and China.
And how does Israel see Iran? Still the #1 threat.
Absolutely. Iran is viewed as the top existential threat. The nuclear program is the main justification Israel uses for its policy, which is essentially regime change in Tehran.
Have recent Israeli strikes achieved that?
No, the regime change hasn't happened. And those strikes apparently cost Israel quite a bit. Burned through resources, maybe exposed capabilities like drone factories built up over a decade, or the ability to launch from the Caspian Sea. Iran, meanwhile, is learning and developing defenses.
But Israel has had successes too.
Oh, yes. Israeli intelligence seems to have penetrated Iranian security very deeply. The assassination attempt on Pezeshkian, knowing the building layout, that shows unprecedented access. Israel might have other surprises up its sleeve, maybe cyber capabilities to cripple infrastructure.
So it's an ongoing shadow war.
Very much so. And Iran is getting better at hitting back. More advanced ballistic missiles that can challenge Israeli air defenses. It's becoming a race, really. Who can knock the other out first? And for someone like Netanyahu, projecting strength as a wartime leader is tied directly to his political survival.
What about Gaza? We saw 25 countries criticizing Israel's actions, but are there any real consequences, any practical steps being taken?
It doesn't seem like it. There's this sense of saturation or exhaustion globally. The constant news of death and suffering in Gaza, it's become almost normalized. It's lost its power to shock. Even the word genocide, used so often without a strong international response, seems to have lost some of its impact.
That's a grim assessment.
It is. It points to what some call a profound indifference from the world regarding the Palestinians. A tragedy, a perversity, or maybe death almost becomes entertainment in the news cycle. China has voiced concern, hinted it might be forced to act in unexpected ways if the killing continues. But Western nations, the view presented is they lack a collective conscience, effectively enabling Israel.
So what could possibly end the conflict?
From this perspective, it ultimately comes down to the bravery of Hamas fighters and the sheer resilience, the stoicism of the Palestinian people enduring this. Israel is described in some analyses as a cancer on the region and the world that needs removal, but the world isn't ready for that kind of step.
Finally, let's touch on Syria. The situation remains incredibly complex. What happens when you remove a leader like Bashar al-Assad without a solid plan for what comes next?
Well, we saw what happened. Power vacuums open up, allowing groups like al-Qaeda and ISIS to surge back. They thrive in chaos, recruiting from local tribes. Syria turned into a killing field, a tragic outcome that really benefits no one, not even Israel in the long run.
And the U.S. response?
There's criticism that the U.S. has acted selectively, responded to things like the White Helmets videos back in 2018 with missile strikes under U.S. President Trump, but seems less responsive now to current atrocities like reported killings of Druze men. The analysis we looked at was blunt. The only way to deal with these extremist groups is to, quote, kill all of these head-chopping murderers. It highlights the terrible dilemmas involved.
We have certainly covered some very complex, very challenging global situations today.
Yeah, the perspectives we've drawn out definitely offer a distinct way of looking at the motives and strategies driving these major international events.
And this deep dive really underscores how interconnected everything is. One action here ripples across the globe. Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.